Welcome back to Slumber IV. We've all, at one point or another, experienced the feeling of being watched. An overwhelming feeling that sends goosebumps up your spine. What if it proved to be more than just a feeling? Well, today's protagonist knows what it's like to have fear become reality. This tale written by elf_x is sure to have you questioning what is on the other side. The other side of what, you may ask? Listen in and find out. As always, if you wish to read more of this writer's work, there will be a link in the description that will direct you to their page. Also, be sure to send stories to rylhstories@gmail.com if you would like to have a story featured on this channel. Now, enjoy the story, and I hope you all have a great night. My name is Alex and I am 31 years old. I have a stable head on my shoulders and have led a good life. I am going to share an experience of which I am most distressed about, and from what I understand, am not the last to view it in its entirety. It is the reason why going out for my night walks makes me nervous, constantly looking over my shoulder every time I hear the trees sway or the leaves rustle, and more importantly, why I never go out at night alone. I've spent years researching and scouring books and the web for any information on the thing I saw that night, but to no avail. The backstory about where I lived. I lived in the city of McAllen, in the grand state of Texas, and no known supernatural occurrences could be found in the area of my neighborhood prior to this. I live in the neighborhood that can be described as run down but passable to live in. I live in a gated neighborhood, and our home was in an enclosed fence that we locked every night. I lived in a raised trailer, raised about 3 feet off the ground on cement bricks on all points, making the windows about eye level for someone to peer in if they were to be on the outside, a point for later. My bedroom had a window and had a light on the outside for good measure. This happened on the night of May 19th of the year 2002, 16 years ago. I was a freshman in high school, aged 15 years old, and had blown my whole week not doing my English final project, which consisted of 2 essays and 6 poems in different styles. All of them had to be typed, so that meant my good old computer and I was gonna have a long night. As I often did in my educational career, I waited for the last minute and it was now Sunday. Naturally, I waited till I had my fun and started my school work past midnight. It was now 2 a.m. in the morning, and I was nearing the end of my assignment when I began to feel uneasy. That feeling lasted for more than an hour, and I started to feel more and more anxious as time went on. It was nearing 3 a.m., and the only thing I could think of was finishing my project for school, as it was due on Monday first thing in the morning. The feeling was still there, and I began to rationalize that I was imagining things, and thought it was attributed to staying up past my bedtime. I have often, at this point, stayed up past my bedtime, which was 10 p.m. because my family is strict, playing Super Smash Bros. On the N64 with friends or watching movies, and never have I noticed anything out of the ordinary. Still, I could not take it any longer. The unnerving feeling of being watched. You see, my room was the only room visible from the outside. No bed curtains, essentially no privacy. My room light was on, so the outside could see me very well as if I was some display in the night. It is at this moment that I gazed up from my computer screen and looked at my bedroom window. The feeling akin to something that was along the lines of being watched was coming from it. I felt very alienated, very exposed, and very foolish that I could go so long into the night and not put a cover on the window for privacy. The sense of dread increased, and I walked up to the window to check for onlookers to calm my nerves. I looked for any sign of anyone, and from the light from my room, and the outside light source from the light pole, I saw nothing. My face was inches away from the window as I hunched my body to look through into the darkness. I looked for anything outside the reach of the lights to see if there was anyone out there spying on me, to see the source of my unease, and found nothing. Then a terrible dread came over me. I saw it. I saw something within my own reflection, literally inches from my own face. I rationalized that maybe it was my face, so I moved and swayed and my own image followed. As expected, but what remained was a shape. Then I thought it was a shadow cast by the two small plants underneath my window, and saw nothing leading from them. I grew increasingly more anxious, and sighed with relief when I finally realized that it was my shadow. My shadow was indeed there, but it was light in contrast compared to the shape that remained in front of me. A cold feeling came upon me, and the subtle hum of my computer faded, and it was silence that greeted me. Fear seized my whole being. I stared at it, and I finally exhausted all of my plausible explanations for it. It just stood there. It was humanoid in shape, and as it stood there bathed in the light from my room and light pole, I could make no details of its form. It was no reflection. It stood on the outside, and for its form to reach the window at its spot made it standing about 6.5 feet tall. I could clearly see my own reflection over it. Curiosity took over, and for once I was no longer afraid. I leaned in closer to get a better look at it. It was all I could call it. It had no visible skin, no hair or depth to form. No light reflected off it, nor did the light reveal anything. I saw no patterns on it, nor anything to give it a profile. This thing had no sex, no race, no anything to give it a human appearance. It was as dark as darkness could be, devoid of color. A shadow with form and shape. My face was closer now than ever before. Any closer and I could feel the cool glass brush against my skin. Then as I struggled with what I was looking at, I gave a nervous laugh and a smile, as I always do in uncomfortable situations. Then this thing, this shape, it smiled back. There before me with a horrendous flash of teeth, it smiled and smiled. Its teeth were white, the sharpest color of white I have ever seen. No discoloration, no stains, almost perfect. If the fear I felt before was fear, then what I was feeling now was that of utter terror. I am sure my face was one of utter shock and terror, and no amount of teenage angst or confidence could save me. Grant you, my face is extremely close to it at this moment. Its sickening smile was all I was preoccupied with. I could no longer bear it, and then I saw them. There they were, blood red, a deep red, the color of bloodwork. Its eyes, and at each center were the darkest pupils I ever saw. It's like they came from a Hollywood horror film. The eyes are the porthole to the soul, and its eyes were empty. They were dead of anything remotely human. Our eyes locked, and horror, pure utter horror, gasped me. As soon as I saw its sinister form of a face, I fell to pieces. I fell back from the window and screamed in terror. The fear had never felt so raw and visceral before. I struggled to get up, but in my fear I could only gaze at its face, its horrendous smile and its hellish eyes. I backed into a corner behind the bed and hid, believing the makeshift blind could shield me from its gaze. But it didn't. I have never known fear of this level before. So much fear that I began to bawl. The terror erased all sense of my reasoning. Suddenly, finishing up my English assignment was no longer important. It felt like hours, hiding behind the bed. It didn't feel safe in my own room. My home felt the farthest thing from safe. I finally could muster some courage to have a look past the bed frame, to bring the window into view without exposing myself to it. I looked. Fear gripped me still. Thoughts of it still being there ran rampant through my mind. And when the window finally came to view, it was gone. I stared at the window, never taking my eyes off it as I slowly raised myself from my corner. only glancing at my door so as to have an escape plan if it came into view. It was gone. No trace of it could be seen. No shape hiding in the trees nor below the window. Nothing. I stood there contemplating what I had just gone through, and what I had just witnessed. As fear left me, I began to rationalize again. Confidence returned soon after, and I then began to doubt that what I had just witnessed was a mind game I created for myself. A lack of sleep or too much caffeine quickly came to mind, and soon so did my musings of it being my reflection. I returned to my seat and shrugged everything off, focusing on my assignment and finishing at 4 a.m. With it being done, I sat there and looked at the window, laughing at myself for being foolish for falling for my own reflection or shadow. And then with the silence of my room returning, I remembered the fear. I remembered the teeth, and I remembered the eyes. The nagging feeling that it had been here replaced my smugness of having finished my English assignment. I went to the window and realized a small detail I had overlooked. Beneath my window is a small puddle of water that collects there in the dirt, giving it a glassy puddle appearance. Since it collects slowly and just sits there, I figured if this thing had been there, I would have seen footprints, and if it wasn't, then I must have imagined it. I looked outside the window and, once again, fear returned to me. There beneath my window was a muddy mess. There was no glassy puddle collected there, but dirtied water still having the consistency of being trudged upon with mud and muck showing signs of being kicked about. A trail leading away from my window and disappearing into the grass and in the darkness. It had been there. It was no dog, as the neighborhood had no dogs and was gated. No children or teenagers, as the tenants were all middle-aged or seniors. The grim realization that everything that had just happened really happened was setting in. Once the light of the sun covered the property, I ventured outside to look at the muddy mess below my window to try and piece together any attributes on its form. I examined the muddy puddle and could find no set of footprints or anything otherwise suggesting something was standing there. I then tried to look into my window from the outside. I barely could get my eyes to look into the window. My head barely passed the bottom edge of the window. My height was about 5'8" at the time, meaning it had stood at least 6 foot and up to be able to get a full view of me. It unnerved me to be standing there, where it had stood, watching me. I shuddered and quickly repressed the utter memories of horror I felt from seeing its smile, its eyes. I told my mother and father about it, and they shrugged it off as dreams. My friends laughed at me, and most people find it fanciful. High school came and went, and I went on to bigger and better things. I know what I saw that night. I wasn't asleep or dreaming. I wasn't delusional nor hallucinating, as I have pulled countless all-nighters, on watch in my career in the Navy, or binge studying in college, and never did I see anything that was remotely a hallucination, or out of the ordinary. I scoured the web and any paranormal things since then, and have found nothing similar to it. The closest to it was a shadow person, an entity, but it failed to fall in the standard description of the Hat Man or Old Hag descriptions. It was a form of both shadow and something tangible and real, and I have no idea if it was a demon, ghost, a shadow, or Darth Maul's cousin paying me a visit. I am writing this to share my story, and if you have encountered something like this, then you are not alone. Years later, I heard several children from my neighborhood have seen a shadow in the dark that watches them with red eyes. They no longer go out at night, and several animals in the area are found dead by strangulation. The people in the area shrug it off as superstition, but to those that have seen it, the night is no longer a time to go out and catch light bugs, but a time of fear. The children who have seen it have moved away, so I can no longer contact them to find out the details of their own stories. So now I'm posting the story here. Hopefully someone may have had a similar experience and can hopefully shed lights on what it was.